When you begin to look at what HTML5 brings to the table, you can quickly see that most of what's considered HTML5 is the addition of a number of different JavaScript APIs. In the coming slides, I'll quickly introduce you to many of the APIs either available today or coming soon to a browser near you. Understand, though, that this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I try to spend some time on the APIs which are most likely to be relevant to you. First up is the Canvas API, and just as described earlier, there's a full-featured JavaScript API that accompanies the new HTML5 element. With the Canvas API, you can declare either a 2D or 3D context through WebGL and use it as a drawing surface within the browser. The Contacts API is a common contacts repository found within the browser. Rather than having to have all your friends or contact information saved directly in Google+ or Facebook or some other website, the Contacts API would allow you to have a local repository of this information that websites could access. Now, the Contacts API is still yet to be implemented by any major browser. The File API gives the browser access to sandbox areas of the user's computer to store data on the file system via JavaScript through the browser. The Forms API has gotten a boost in HTML5 with the addition of built-in validation, and in the next module, you'll learn how to implement a validation form that uses the built-in rules as well as extend the validation to evaluate against custom rules. With the rise in popularity of mobile devices, the geolocation API gives the browser the opportunity to request location information from the user. Once granted, the browser is able to use a number of different methods to determine the physical location of the computer or device. Now, there's a scale of accuracy in how the location is determined, and when you're ready to dig into geolocation, I cover it in the Advanced Topics course. The API includes data points such as latitude and longitude, and is a perfect fit for modern location-aware applications. IndexdB is an API in the realm of local storage within the browser. While there's a few APIs that deal with local storage of data, IndexdB's purpose is to store sizable amounts of structured data within the browser. So while you may save a few JSON objects using other APIs, you might store megabytes of data within IndexdB. And it comes stock with the same type of indexing you'd expect in any other database to make high-performance queries against data. You can think of IndexdB more like an object database rather than a traditional relational database. And there are also different APIs for synchronous as well as async access to data. While browser support is beginning to even out, make sure you check out resources like caniuse.com for details on how well browsers are supporting each API. The media capture capabilities will make device access native to the browser through JavaScript. You'll be able to access the camera, webcam, and so on. When you consider HTML5 microdata, if you think of how content on the web is consumed, you soon realize that the consumer is not just people, but also machines. Now, we have different types of services that are tailor-made for machines, and we have web pages with pretty styles and images that are optimized for humans. But what about being able to create a single page that has content fit for both computers as well as people? Well, Microdata does just that. By sprinkling in some extra metadata in your existing HTML documents, you're able to readily expose information to machines that is just as easily presented to users. In the Advanced Topics course, I demonstrate for you how to create a contact page that is both human and machine readable, plus much more with Microdata. The messaging API is used in conjunction with other APIs like web workers, which I'll discuss more in a moment. With the Offline Application API, you have the ability to mark certain pages and resources of your websites as being able to be available even when there's no connection to the internet available. This works similarly to the existing browser cache, but resources loaded within the offline features are reliably served up to the browser upon request, again when there's no internet connection. Plus, you can also mark a certain resource as being server only. So you use this in the case where a server is particularly required, like search screens or dynamic listings from the database. Now, I've worked extensively with the Offline API, so once you complete this course, if you'd like to learn more about it, I suggest you take a look at two other courses that I've done. The first is HTML5 Advanced Topics, where I dive deep into a number of HTML5 APIs not covered in this course. The Advanced Topics course covers local storage, web workers, WebSockets, geolocation, and offline applications like I've mentioned before. To see the offline features in context of a working application, you might want to also check out HTML5 line of business apps with Bootstrap, MVC4, and Web API. In this course, I build an application from beginning to end, and at the core of the application is the HTML5 offline app capabilities. The need for the selection API is really highlighted by the wild success of libraries like jQuery. In the pre-jQuery, pre-HTML5 days, trying to select elements out of the document object model was painful at best. jQuery really filled in that gap by making selection easy, but now advanced selection capability is built directly into the browser. Now, even as fast as jQuery's selection engine is, having native selection built into the browser is a great benefit to performance. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that the sun is set on jQuery. Yes, one of jQuery's strengths is DOM selection, but jQuery provides so much more, and there's certainly room for everyone. In fact, in the coming demos throughout this course, you'll learn reasons why sometimes it's advantageous to use jQuery and then switch to native selection, and vice versa. Server-sent events are an efficient API for sending messages from the server to the browser in one direction, whereas WebSockets, which I'll talk about in a moment, are a full duplex bidirectional communication path. Now, with server-sent events, you can stream data to connected clients. The nice thing about server-sent events is that it transmits via HTTP. So as long as the response has a text/event stream content type associated with it, the browser can recognize the transmission. Toasts. Some people love it, and others hate it. Web Notifications is the API that will allow you to display notifications to users initiated from the browser. So this basically gives you an opportunity to display Toast within the operating system from a web page. As of summer 2013, this API is still considered experimental by the WC3 and not implemented in very many browsers. The WebSockets API allows you to send sockets to and from the server. The typical example used here is often a chat application. If you wanted to build a chat without sockets, then you'd likely have to keep polling the server for new messages. With sockets, as messages intended for connected browsers are sent from the server, they're automatically received on the client from the established socket connection. Now, if you get a chance to check out the Advanced Topics course, I'll take you through building an application using the WebSockets API. Now, when we talk about web storage, it comes in two flavors: local storage and session storage. So if you're familiar with server-side web development, the idea of session storage is probably not new to you. Basically, as long as the user is working within the same session on the page, the data persists. If the browser is closed or they move on to another session, then the data no longer exists. Local storage persists among sessions, but it's sandboxed to the site of origin. So local storage gives you the opportunity to save more information than you might save in a cookie and less information that you might save in indexdb on the client. What's particularly interesting about the data stored within web storage is that unlike a cookie, the data is not sent to the server with each request. All of it stays on the client. In the Advanced Topics course, I show you how to use web storage to create an interactive application that stores data into local storage and then synchronizes it to the server. Now, when you think of web workers, you can picture in your mind how threading might work within a browser. If you're building an application where any of the processing is being done on the client has the opportunity to hang the UI thread and make the page unresponsive to the user, then by using web workers, you can split that processing out into a worker which operates within its own execution context. As the worker is running in the browser, the messaging API is used to communicate back to the UI thread in order to keep the page responsive, all the while the browser is continually running the resource-intensive operations. And yep, web workers is covered in my Advanced Topics course as well. And finally, XML HTTP request level 2, or our good friend AJAX, gets an update as well. Now, the AJAX APIs are really pretty full-featured, but one thing that's a built-in limitation of AJAX is the single origin domain constraint. In other words, you can't send an AJAX request to a server that's not the server of origin of the running application. Now, this rule is in place for a good reason. So you can't have an application gather your credit card information and then send it to some other malicious site. But there are legitimate reasons for wanting to use different servers within modern web development. So level 2 allows for cross-domain posting, but it adds a security layer so that the interaction is controlled and secure.